Hello everybody, welcome to our CakeFu Master Series. I am Amelia Carbine, your host, and I apologize that you won't be able to see me today. We had some technical things that wouldn't allow, so I am here though. You should be able to hear me throughout the training. So yeah, we have a really great guest with us. We've had her here before. Lisa Berczel is here. Welcome, Lisa.
Well, hello, everyone.
It's very nice to have you on again.
Well, it's good to be here. It really is, and the CakeFu community has been very supportive and very energetic. So I like having the opportunity to come back on and just share a little bit more education. So thank you for the invitation.
Awesome, great. Well, for those of you that don't know Lisa, you guys really do need to get to know her. She is amazing. I know she hasn't been, the celebrity on all the TV shows or anything like that, but she is amazingly spectacular. Lisa, you started out as an airbrush body artist, is that right?
Yes, well, I started out dabbling in everything, and in my corporate world, I wasn't getting to be creative. So, long story short, I stumbled into body painting and airbrushing on body painting, and Corvettes and cars and motorcycles, and I ended up collecting all my dabbling in my Martha Stewart moments and having an opportunity to focus on culinary, and that seems to be where I'm really happy right now. So I'm really enjoying taking everything I've learned in all these different disciplines and bringing it into the culinary, and a lot of cross-pollination, so to speak.
Great. Well, yeah, anything airbrushed, anything artistic, you're into. It seems.
Well, I get into some trouble sometimes, but yes.
Awesome. Well, we actually have some pictures of some of the things that you've done.
Wonderful.
And I want to show some of those to you guys. Just a collage of some of your work. Really spectacular stuff. I just am really impressed. We couldn't get on all of the stuff that you've done, but this is really
well, some of it's
stuff.
a little bit more risque than others.
Sure. Yeah, if you guys want to visit Lisa's Facebook page, she has a lot of the pictures of things that she does. A lot of body painting and really, full body, really intricate, really interesting stuff. So, yeah. So,
well, what you're looking at on the slide there, the lower center picture, that's actually colored cocoa butter. That's all edible. That's on we rolled out a nice big piece of black fondant and attached it to a canvas. And that's layers of white, Arline yellow, orange, and then just a little bit of purple shimmer at the end. So, yeah, and amongst all the body painting is something that you maybe wouldn't expect to be completely edible. The green jade girl that's all edible, and I cut out is airbrushed on an icing sheet, which I cut out, and then I have some satin fabric behind it. But yeah, she's all edible and with hand painted details.
All right. Well, they are really spectacular, and this is just an example of the amazing things that Lisa can do. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this. I really want to let you guys know what Lisa's going to explain to us how an airbrush works and troubleshooting, that kind of stuff. So many people are either intimidated to buy an airbrush because they're afraid of not being able to use it or take care of it properly, or there's people that have jumped in and bought an airbrush and now you have it, now what? So we want to show you guys some really useful information on how to take care of your airbrush, and if you run into problems, what you're going to find, what you need to do. Yes, and also we wanted to talk about Lisa's Craftsy class that just came out yesterday. Is that right? Yesterday?
Yes, yes.
Awesome. That is
So I'm
so awesome.
very excited about that opportunity as well. So
Yeah. So you guys need to check out her page, her Craftsy page, and you guys want to, go ahead and take a look at that. And today, for 24 hours, we are offering a discount for you guys, and it's an exclusive discount that they've given to us for Lisa's training, or for her class. So it is the class is normally $59.99, right?
all right, sounds about right.
And yeah, and today it's on sale for $49.99. So you need to jump on, take advantage of that $10 discount, because this is, I mean, airbrushing is something that I know, me personally, I've had a hard time with until I took a class from Lisa. So, yeah.
That was a fun day. There was a lot of green flying around.
Oh yes, there was a lot. It was a really great class.
Oh, thank you. And I knew you weren't feeling well too, so that made it. You were a trooper. But I do want to mention that the Craftsy class. Craftsy now has a master class level of classes, and they're more than. It's more technical, more lecture oriented. So this is one of the first classes that's going to be in that series. So yes, I work on little projects, but it's mostly geared project-wise to just show you how you would be using it in your own world, rather than make this cute little fuzzy bunny. So
Awesome.
That's why the class is set up the way it is, and why it's rated the way it is, and why it's priced the way it is.
Yeah, this I can guarantee you guys. I haven't had a chance to check out the class yet. I know I need to run grab it, but I know that this is going to be an amazing class, just because I know Lisa. She is just crammed full of information, and she can really share all the information that she has. She's very good at explaining, very articulate, and very detailed. Just it's going to be an amazing class, and so definitely worth it for anybody who wants to improve their airbrushing skills, or begin their airbrushing, and or take it to that next level. It's going to be good for everybody. So I know I'm going to take advantage of that.
Yeah. So thank you very much. And okay.
Oh, and we are going to be doing a giveaway also. So. So yes,
excellent.
Make sure you stick around to the end, because we'll give away her class.
And you have to forgive me, I got an eyelash in my eye, so I've been dealing with my eye right now. The first image that you have up here is the spray pattern coming out of a modern airbrush. Amelia, do you have the Venturi Force picture? Is that next, where the mouth's blowing on the straw?
Yes. Would you like to
Can we start with it? Yeah, I want to start with that one.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. So before we get into a modern airbrush, it's helpful for people to understand some of the science that's involved with how an airbrush works. This is the basic. This is the first airbrush that you're looking at, and it's nothing more than 2 straws. And you have a tube that's blowing across. You can see the mouth blowing on that first tube, and then you can see a straw that's in our colored liquid. And what we're taking advantage of is we're creating a low pressure. We're creating a low pressure by blowing over that straw through the air tube. The harder we blow through that tube, the more low pressure we create, the further that we blow the color. So that low pressure is what's sucking up the green fluid in the straw. And then as soon as it hits the air that we're blowing through that tube, that's when it breaks apart and sprays. So very, very basic. And this is an actual device that you'll see for sale, even in cake decorating, for blowing lusters. But obviously, we're not going to use this for cake decorating, because we've got our own breath and everything that's in it blowing across there. But this is a 150-year-old piece of equipment that's still around today, and it's the driving force and science into what makes a modern airbrush work. So yeah, so now we can back up to the first slide that you showed, which was the spray coming out of a modern airbrush.
Okay, there you go.
And what is important in this picture is, and it doesn't matter make, model, or style of airbrush, that silver gizmo there, it doesn't matter. Insert your equipment. What's important to see is the shape of the airbrush spray itself that's coming out of this piece of equipment. And it should look a lot like a flashlight beam. The closer to the front of the airbrush, the tighter everything's together. That's why we have a nice tight circle. If you just chop that air spray and turn it and look straight at it, you'll see it's very, very tight perimeter. The closer you are to the airbrush nozzle. The further away you get, the more that color spreads out and disperses, and the softer it gets. That's what you see in that second circle, that second bisect, is it's getting much softer and fuzzier and larger. And if you get far enough away from that cone-shaped spray, it'll actually drift off into nothing. So when we're airbrushing, we're taking advantage of everything that's in that cone. So if I want tight lines, if I want tight controlled spray, I'm going to be working much closer to the surface. If I'm doing accent work, I'm going to be working somewhere in the middle of the cone and just catching a little bit of spray on my little flower that I'm airbrushing. If I'm painting a cake gold, I'm going to be much closer to the end of that airbrush spray because I want a nice big spray area that doesn't have hard lines. And what I do is I build up spray, I overlap it line by line by line, so I get a nice integrated layering effect. That's how I get a nice solid color on a cake rather than something that goes stripy. So this is the heart of what we're trying to get the airbrush to do today. The larger our equipment, the more power we have, the more air we have, the more of this flashlight beam air cone color that we have available to us to work with. The smaller and more delicate our equipment, the smaller that spray pattern is going to be. So that's what we're trying to get, and we want that spray to be nice and smooth and consistent. And now we can go into a bit of the innards and what's making that spray on the inside of the airbrush.
Great.
Yep. And we'll come back to the splatter.
That's that one? Okay.
Yeah, what we're looking for now is the
here.
exploded drawing, yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Here we go.
Okay. What we have is, you see the big black arrow? That's the airflow. That's where our hose is connected. Mm-hmm. And that's going to blow air up through a tube on the inside of the airbrush, and it's being forced out the front. So it's a little bit upside down of what we were looking at with the mouth on the tube. So just take that picture and turn it upside down. So we've got air coming from the bottom, and then we've got color coming from the top, and that's what's underneath that reservoir lid. So we have two tubes that are coming together. The color is going to be coming through the very center of that tube, and it's going to be coming through the fluid nozzle. The air is being forced around that fluid nozzle in a ring, and the very, very end of the airbrush where the fluid nozzle and the fluid needle meet is inside that nozzle cap. That's where everything combines, and that's where our little cone of color is coming out. It's coming out from that nozzle cap. Can we look at where the fluid needle and fluid nozzle illustrations, where the needle goes into the nozzle?
Yep.
Okay. So I've gotten rid of all the other parts so that you can see the heart of the matter. And this is where our color is coming through. It's coming through the fluid needle, which is inside the color tube, and then it's being forced through the fluid nozzle. And can we go into the next slide?
Uh-huh.
Now you can see how that needle comes all the way forward, and I made a cutaway so that you can see that it's actually mating on the inside. And the angle of the fluid needle is meeting up against the inside wall of the fluid nozzle. So when that needle seats all the way forward, the tube where the paint is coming through is closed off. So that needle is actually acting as a stopper. When we pull our trigger back and we mechanically pull that needle back is when we open up. Oh, we're not ready for those yet.
That was a mistake.
That's okay. But that's what opens up the floodgates. That's what opens up and allows color to come through. So you're pulling back on the paint stopper, basically, in a very controlled manner. The more you pull back, the more open that hole is, and the more color that can come through the fluid nozzle. So we've gone through how we're deliberately creating a low pressure to draw the paint through a tube, and how that tube is the fluid nozzle, and how the fluid needle is acting as a stopper. So hopefully that's kind of straightforward. Not trying to be too intimidating with it, but the more you understand about how an airbrush is designed to work, the more realistic expectations we have of the equipment, and the easier it is to learn the equipment, what it can do for us, and how to use it and what we want it to do.
Yeah, well, you know, it really is crucial, because airbrushes tend to, you know, have problems.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know how it works, how are you going to fix the problem? And the last thing we want is to get into a situation where we are, you know, we have a deadline, we've got hours to have this cake ready, you need to pull out your airbrush and do this little detail work, and it's not working. What do we do?
Yeah.
You know, so it's important.
Well, there's a lot of engineering, there's a lot of precision tolerances happening, and you know, it's all everything that you're looking at here is stainless steel. The airbrush body itself is chrome. So it's made out of very rugged equipment. But these two parts that are required to make this airbrush function have high precision tolerances, and they are delicate, even though they're stainless steel. And most of the trouble that people have with airbrushing comes from cleaning, improper cleaning, and damage to these two delicate parts that are on the screen right now. So when we start having problems with an airbrush, and that's why we're going to go through some of the basic troubleshooting to show exactly what's going on in this heart of the airbrush. So we can take a look at the next slide.
Okay.
This is the most common. This is a partially blocked fluid nozzle. So you can see that the fluid needle isn't making a good stopper. It can't come all the way forward because something is dried, or we've got too big a purl. We tried to put a disco sparkle through our airbrush. Something is jamming the front of that. And so the needle can't come all the way forward and basically close our bottle. It can't be a stopper, which means the second that our airbrush is on, it's going to be spraying a little bit of color. And obviously it's a bad thing. You're going to lose some control. Now, if that blockage is big enough, the needle's not even going to come through the tip. It's going to be pulled back even further, and you're not going to be able to get any color through. This can be from, again, using the wrong product, using too thick a product for the airbrush or the airbrush that we have available to us, using a product that's has too big a chunk, and just, again, improper cleaning.
Okay.
So the next one.
Sorry. Oh, there's some explanation here.
Oh, some more explanation.
Mm-hmm. If the blockage is too large, it'll be completely stopped, as you just said.
Yep.
So, okay, there you go.
Yep. All right. Now Now there is that gray object. That's our fluid nozzle.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got the needle coming through just like we saw before. And that outer piece is our nozzle cap. That's what's protecting a lot of these delicate parts. Now, if you'll notice, remember me talking about that ring of air that that surrounds our paint path? You can see that ring of air is made by the nozzle cap. You'll see a gap right between the fluid nozzle and the nozzle gap. If that ring of air is interrupted, I don't know, Amelia, if you can take your cursor and just kind of circle around so they can see what we're talking about.
It's right here.
And see that inside circle? There you go. It's like a bullseye. Mm-hmm. So the center of the bullseye is the fluid needle that's poking through. The next ring of the bullseye is the opening of the fluid nozzle. That's that heavier black line. Then there's an open gap, and then you have the cap, the nozzle cap. So right where she's poking.
Outer part.
Yep. If that circle is blocked, air is not going to be able to completely surround our color. We're going to get skips. We're going to, maybe if it's bad enough, it's going to back bubble on its own. You're going to have color bubbling up inside your cap. It's not going to airbrush at all. And if we set our airbrush in an airbrush holder after we've been spraying for a long time and color builds up in the needle cap area, maybe it'll flow back in and dry and block that. Maybe we've tried wiping the front of the airbrush off with a Q-tip and we've just smashed color and smushed it into that area. So you can clean the outside of that nozzle cap, but if there's any color that's leaked back in, it can be on the inside of the nozzle cap and it can give you a problem.
So are you saying that you don't want to clean that with a Q-tip?
You can, but you got to be careful about it. Again, that delicate little fluid needle, and the needle is very sharp. For as delicate as it is, it's a needle, and it'll poke you bad. So a lot of us will use a cotton swab. I'll do it myself, but you have to know that if you're getting reckless with it or heavy-handed with it, you can make the problem worse. You can shove color back up in there, or you can actually damage that needle. Okay. So it's all of us airbrush artists will play with that, but know that you can create a problem for yourself.
Okay. Is there a better way to take care of that?
Make sure that your airbrush is in the holder facing down slightly so it's not running back up into the fluid path. And if you airbrush for long periods of time, just keep an eye on that outermost needle cap that screws onto the end of this, that you'll be able to look at that exploded isometric, that exploded diagram and see, or look at your own piece and see. Just keep an eye on that, because color will build up if you've been going to town for a half an hour. And you can unscrew that needle cap and wipe it out with a Q-tip without ever having to touch these more delicate parts.
It's good to know. I know that my first airbrush, I screwed it up pretty bad. You know,
we all do.
You know, the little the little, not the cap, but the little part that you can actually screw it off and on most airbrushes, and you know, it comes with this tiny little wrench thing. Yep. And I took it off thinking, oh, it needs to be all cleaned out, and I went to put it back on, and I twisted too hard. It didn't take much to twist too hard. No. It is a very delicate, very, you know, exact little piece, and if you tighten even more than just, you know, it'll just
it'll snap right off. That fluid nozzle is a little bigger than a grain of rice, so the threading on it is very thin, and all of us, we all have our little wrenches, and if we have a wrench, we must be supposed to use it. So I mean, you've not done anything that I didn't do when I was first starting out. And I want to say that shearing off a fluid nozzle it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So, and it's just like damaging the needle. these are wear parts. They will wear out eventually on their own accord.
Mm-hmm.
And the more heavy-handed we are with the equipment, the more likely we are to damage it. And I don't want to scare everybody and have them thinking that they have to treat this like glass. It's like, no, you don't. But if you understand what we're dealing with, then it's going to affect how you work with the equipment, and you're going to have more success with the equipment.
All right,
so
great.
Next is our bent needle slide.
Yes.
There we go. You've snagged it on something. Maybe you've dropped it.
Or you pulled it apart and your little boy gets to it and smashes it on the counter.
Yes.
Not saying that really happened.
Well, and this is why the airbrush has that outermost needle cap, is so that we don't have an exposed needle that can drag and get and snag on things. And fortunately, in the cake decorating world, a little bit of a bent needle isn't really going to affect performance. If it gets bent as bad as what we see here, you're going to have real problems. It's going to spray sideways. That cone of airbrush color isn't going to be even. It's going to be lopsided. It's going to be going off to the side. And if it's hooked, like you see in this illustration, if you pull the needle back, it's not going to come all the way back. You're not going to be able to get all your paint flow, and you're going to be, instead of sliding all the way back through the nozzle cap as it's supposed to, as we saw in the cutaway, all of a sudden now it's going to be stopped at the very delicate end of that nozzle cap, and we're going to start creating damage there. So if you can't pull a needle out of an airbrush, maybe it's dried in place because you're as abusive to your equipment as I am. Maybe it's dropped on the floor. Maybe you're troubleshooting it and need to do a cleaning. If you can't pull that needle out, before you start taking pliers and having at, take a look at that needle. Make sure it's straight. Make sure that you're not damaging your nozzle cap by just trying to get that needle out. The needle is going to wear out, and it can be, it's like a $10, $15 part, depending on the make, model of the airbrush. Mm-hmm. That nozzle cap can be $25 to $50, depending on the make, model, and brand. The nozzle cap is a more expensive part because there's more engineering involved. So we'd rather replace a needle and have to work on that than have to worry about replacing the fluid nozzle as well. So the next slide shows what happens to that poor nozzle.
There you go. Oh, dang
There
it.
we go. And normal wear and tear, and I'm talking years of use. If nothing else, you don't have any other bad luck. Normal wear and tear, that nozzle will eventually split because it repeatedly is having that needle slide forward and meet it. So it's going to eventually just flex enough to wear out. Mm-hmm. It'll start splitting. We can force it to split if we shove that needle too far forward. We'll splay it out just like a banana peel. If our needle was hooked too bad and we just try ripping it back out, it can force a tear the other way. Your airbrush is going to work if this is what's going on right now. If you have this, and again, it can be very difficult to see. You're going to need your magnifying glass, or with some experience, you can feel along the edges of the fluid nozzle and you can feel whether it's got a burr on it or not. But just a black line can be a split nozzle, or if it's really bad, it's going to be splayed open like you see in the illustration. And yeah, it's not going to work at all. Maybe you might be able to get a sputter line, but it needs to replace. There is no fixing this.
Okay, great. Just for all of you guys that are out there, again, just to repeat, if you have questions for Lisa throughout all of this, that's what we're here for, is to answer your questions. So in that chat box, make sure that you're asking the questions that you have for Lisa. if you have an airbrush that it's having a specific problem, go ahead and ask that, and we'll see if we can get that answered for you. If it's not, if it's just a technique thing, go ahead and ask that.
Ask it away.
Any
Now that
kind
I've
of
scared
questions.
everybody.
No, you're totally fine.
Well, let's talk a little bit about just color, and so get away from all the engineering, intimidating stuff. You had laying down color. It was 3 little pictures, 3 little piles of lines and dots and squiggles. So let's go to that because it's a little bit more. Yeah.
I didn't have it in the right order, apparently. Oh, there it was.
That's okay. There we go. All right. That top one is, if I hand painted color, it's going to lay down like cornflakes. So my brush is going to be laying down pigment and paint, and it's, again, cornflakes is a perfect analogy. So very, very thick, very chunkier application. If I take that exact same product and put it through an airbrush, that's what you see in that middle picture. So that paint, instead of big chunky flakes, is going to be tiny, tiny little dots. That's atomized paint. It's the mist of color. So it will be much thinner application of color to get the same amount of coverage as hand painting. That's one of the advantages of the airbrush. Is nice, even color. Now that bottom picture, you'll see that, yes, we've got our little circles of color, but that you've also got these little white ovals. This is what we get when we're airbrushing pearls and micas that have a color. The pearls and micas, these colors are always going to be more transparent. They're going to be more sheer, because they have to be. Because if I had enough paint in there to completely color and have an opaque color, I would be painting my pearl, and the pearl wouldn't have any effect. So I see people and I get questions, I'm doing a blue pearl, my cake isn't blue, I get enough color on there for it to be the color I want, it's a wet, soggy mess. And that's why, because you're trying to get a color coverage out of a pearl that it's not necessarily designed to do. And if it is a color that's dark enough, and it doesn't have as much shimmer as I was expecting. All the airbrush color manufacturers are trying to hit that happy balance between how solid the color is and how much shimmer it has. That's why in class I teach airbrush a blue base and then airbrush with a blue pearl. You get a lot more intensity of color. It doesn't take any longer, but you're using a lot less product and you have a lot better intensity payoff. So as an area of troubleshooting, understanding how these colors layer and how pearls work, it can be a big help.
All right. Great. Okay. You also had this right here. Let's pull that up. This one right here.
Yes.
This is genius. I love it.
This is a fun technique. This is splattering. So the cake back that you're looking at, this is all colored cocoa butter. So I've got a fondant base, white fondant base, and I've airbrushed a tan gradient. And then I've gone in and done some hand layering, some sponge work, and then hand painting of 3 layered colors. What I wanted to do to really keep this scroll work looking modern is I wanted to have a nice speckle splatter texture to it. So this is an old 80s t-shirt artist trick. You take a craft stick, and you'll see I'm resting the airbrush on that craft stick. And I'm airbrushing my color at an angle down onto the craft stick, and then all the extra air is taking that puddle that I've made on the end of the craft stick and flinging it across onto the cake. So you can see I've got some smaller splatters and larger splatters. The angle of the airbrush resting on the craft stick, the higher and lower the angle, it changes the size of the splatter from very fine sand all the way up through the bigger, bigger, almost dripping that you can get for splats. So this is a fun technique for, again, sand, natural coverage. Maybe you want to do some big dripping blood for a Halloween cake. You can go all the way up to just absolutely wild and crazy. So it's a nice way to create texture. So that's why I included it in there. I thought it'd be fun. When I'm demonstrating, everybody always gets excited about this because it's a lot of fun to play with.
It is really fun. I mean, I've seen this picture of yours on your Facebook page, this cake, and I loved it. And I really didn't look as closely as I should have, I guess, to see how it had those splatters on it. But honestly, there was a picture of a textured, just a scrapbook page, that I really thought was gorgeous, and I wanted to duplicate this, but I just didn't know how to get it to look that way. I could do mostly everything, but it had speckles on it, and I just was, how do I get that? How do I get that? And this right here is the answer. This is it.
The non-airbrush way to get those speckles is to take an old toothbrush or an old scrubby chipboard paintbrush and dip just the end bristles, like an eighth of an inch, just get a little bit of coverage on them, and then you got to take your finger and you got to flick it across, and that works, but obviously it's a lot messier.
Yes. Yeah. I love this technique.
It does take a little bit getting used to. When I did this cake, I had another piece over to the side, so I could make sure everything was in harmony. I could get my angle. I could basically warm up before I actually hit my cake. So I do advise that with this technique. Just like with the hand painting, I'm going to have a little practice pad, and I'm going to get the hand flow and everything all warmed up and make sure everything is properly flowing right, my paintbrush is happy before I start painting my scroll work. So it's no different with the airbrush. I'm sure I don't do a lot of piping, but I'm sure with hands you're going to do a little bit of practicing off to the side before you hit that cake. You're going to just make sure everything is a proper consistency before you start piping. So it's the exact same mentality.
Wonderful. Yes, this is true. We have a lot of questions rolling in already.
Excellent. Let's go start going through them then.
Like I said, with this training, there are so many people that have airbrushes that have so many questions, and they don't know who to ask. So Lisa's here now. All right. Okay, so we have, let's see, our first question. How should I set up for my very first ever practice run?
Very first ever practice run? Honestly, I would just be putting water through the airbrush on a paper bag. Make sure everything's working. The water is absorbed in the paper bag. It gives you a chance to get used to the feel of the down for air, back for paint, and that everything is functioning properly. If you have gone through all your basic techniques and learning on a paper pad and you're ready to start working on completely edible, I like using something like an edible icing sheet because it behaves a lot like fondant. And it's nice to just put it on an easel. I test designs, I test colors, I test equipment out on the icing sheets. Is it more expensive than paper? Absolutely. Is it less expensive and less hassle than rolling out fondant? Absolutely. So that's just my method. And I'm going to jump just a tiny bit because there's another bit of troubleshooting I think people are going to have fun with when you're testing your equipment, especially if you have an old school traditional airbrush where you've got the button on the top and you have to push down for your air and pull back for paint. Make sure you begin and end your stroke with air. It's air, paint, air, always. If you go back to that Venturi force where we're blowing through that tube, if the air just stops, you've got color that's already been pulled up through that straw and is ready to go. and
Mm-hmm.
then all of a sudden, no air. Well, that color isn't sprayed, so it just sits there, and it sits there, and it waits for more air. So the second you put on more air, you've got color that's now no longer atomized, it's just a splat. So as soon as the
Yeah.
air hits it, it's going to splat onto your cake, and it's the fly speck effect, is what I call it.
Ah, that's where you get your splatters.
Yep, that's the
Yeah.
leading culprit behind splatters. And so again, when you're testing your equipment, part of testing the equipment is warming up and making sure that we've got good technique, air, paint, air.
Okay, so what if somebody has an airbrush that doesn't have that push down for air? You know, some airbrushes just have the pull back mechanism. They don't have that dual
Yeah,
action.
yeah,
Is there?
it's what I call a disabled double action,
Mm-hmm.
and the air sources on those are usually very, very low, and you're not going to get that kind of splatter, the fly speckle splatter, because you don't have a choice that your air is on all the time. However, uh, the amount of air pressure that is needed to properly atomize, to mist that color, can be affected by those small units. The thinner the color, the better in those. As you turn down the air pressure and it gets weaker and weaker and weaker, it's not going to atomize the color as much. So you'll go from a fine mist of color to a very coarse looking color, to the point to where if the product is too thick for the size of the airbrush or the amount of air pressure that you have, it just won't spray at all, or it'll be very, very, very coarse, very splattery. So
Okay.
there is a balance. Everything in airbrush is a balance. It's a balance of how much pressure, it's a balance of how thick the fluid is, and it's a balance of distance between the airbrush and the object that we're airbrushing.
Okay. Let's see. We have another question. How do you airbrush cocoa butter and color it?
I love cocoa butter. As you can
Of
see by the little
course.
picture that's up there, it's one of my favorite things. Cocoa butter is very thick. It's solid um, at room temperature, and we need to warm it up to about 88 degrees, keep it in temper, and we need to airbrush in with equipment that's big enough to have enough air pressure. So we need about 30 psi working pressure. So we're going to need a bigger compressor for sure. Cocoa butter, when it's melted, is thick. It's like a light cream. So we're going to need a larger needle size. I would advise you can airbrush with a 0.3 tip, the 3.5 tip, but you're going to want a 0.5 or 0.7. And you'll see the chocolatiers airbrushing with external mixed single action airbrush because they're just doing big splats. But I like using the trigger style airbrushes for that. That's what was used on the piece that you see here. And the flame work on the very first slide where you saw my portfolio, the
Mm-hmm.
cocoa butter flame, that's how that was airbrushed.
Great. All right. Someone's asking, can you make a DIY airbrush?
The airbrush equipment itself, no. Again, there's a lot of precision machine tolerance going on. There's several different makes and models, and even though the pieces may look similar, you cannot take brand A's fluid nozzle or fluid needle and put it in brand J's airbrush. The mating, how the needle interacts with that fluid nozzle, it won't line up properly. You could damage your airbrush because of that. So not interchangeable between makes and models. So you can imagine the machining that would be required to make an airbrush. Now DIY colors, on the other hand, that can be done, but I strongly advise that you get some experience under your belt with colors that were designed for an airbrush, so that you understand what some of the pitfalls are.
Okay, great. Someone asking, if I wanted to buy an airbrush, what should I be looking for?
First thing, in order to have realistic expectations of what the equipment can do, is answer the question for yourself, what do you want the airbrush to do for you? If you know you're only ever going to be doing just tiny little stencils or tiny little accents on flowers, then a smaller equipment set, or what they commonly call the introductory sets, could be a good fit for you. You're going to be sacrificing a lot of capability because the second you turn on that equipment, that's all it can do. So if you want to paint a 3-tier cake gold, can you do it? Maybe, but I'll see you next week. If you know that you want something to be all around, I want to do details and I want to do the occasional larger piece, then that's going to affect your equipment choices and you're going to want bigger, more robust equipment. It's much better to go down in capabilities, have more capability than you need, than be in a situation where you don't have the ability because you've maxed out the equipment just by turning it on.
Okay. Someone's asking, can you use a spray bottle to substitute for an airbrush?
Yes, the spray bottle, the splatters, in fact, can be done with a spray bottle. However, you're not atomizing color. You're spraying color. You're splatting it. You're not going to get as even a coverage. It's going to be much coarser, much looser, and it's also going to be much wetter because the splats are so much bigger than the atomized mist. So I use spray bottles for a texture effect, not for color layering or application like that, just for special effect. Okay.
All right, so basically a spray bottle would be okay for splattering, making little, you know, dot type of things. Yes,
not little dots, big.
Bigger, yes. Big. Compared to the airbrush, bigger. Yeah.
Much, much bigger. It would be bigger even than the white splatter that you see on the cake. I would use it for 80s stonework if you wanted to do granite or marble. That would be a good texture layer for that. Going back to the Halloween cakes and blood and gore, zombie cakes, spray bottle. But it's going to be a big enough piece splatter that it's probably going to drip. So you're going to be putting a lot of liquid straight on a cake. Would you take a spray bottle full of water and take it to your buttercream or your fondant? Ooh.
Yeah, probably not. So I would not recommend that.
But if you're doing a special effect, if you want that kind of look, then experiment. Go for it. You know, give it a try.
All right. Someone said, would you try using a coloring book to learn to control your air?
Yeah, that's a very common technique. It also can be used to learn stenciling and freehand shield work. So it's a good way to see how colors can layer with each other and how you can deliberately control the overspray so that you can create hard lines where you want and have the color fade off and be soft. Yeah, and it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Someone on here says, mine sits in the closet. I know that's not a question, but I'll pull it out.
Well,
airbrushes are so much fun.
Well, it is a good point because I've been airbrushing for 10 years, but my first airbrush was bought 20 years ago. I got an airbrush, and I want to learn how to use it, and I didn't have access to all the online information that's available now and all the online education. So I got a book on airbrush, and I'm looking at it, and I got my first project. I tried taking artist color, mixing it with water, and putting it in my airbrush. That didn't work. The first book was all about stencils. There was more cutting out of stencils than was airbrushing it. And I'm like everybody else. I just want to make something pretty. So it was very frustrating. So that airbrush sat in a drawer for a decade.
Oh, wow.
If the information, and you always get to a point where you go shoulda, coulda, woulda. What would my profile and my portfolio and my skill set be if I'd had the education then? Who knows? But in the intervening 10 years, I learned a lot of other skills that are as equally relevant and applied to what I do now. But the whole concept of airbrush being a doorstop, been there, done that.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm kind of the same. I bought an airbrush. It was a beginner style airbrush. It wasn't the little tiny ones, you know, with the itty bitty compressors. It was, you know, the red one, the red compressor ones with the, you know, real basic. And and the only thing I ever used it for was doing an overall kind of luster on my cakes. That was the only thing I ever used my airbrush for. And, I finally, took a class from you, and everything was great. So yeah, if you have an airbrush and you just don't know what to do with it, Lisa's class, her craftsy class, it's right there. Okay, let's see. Let's see, someone asks, what type of airbrush would you say would be good for a newbie, for someone just starting out?
Just starting out, again, I think it really depends on what you need the equipment to do for you, because it's going to affect your equipment choice. And if you get addicted to airbrush, you're going to end up owning more than one airbrush. If you start out with one of the small little aquarium pump beginner sets that's like super inexpensive, and you really start enjoying the airbrush, you're going to have to move up to a larger equipment. It's one of the frustrations that I see students go through is, I just want to start a unit. I don't want to spend a lot of money. I want to find out if I like it. That's well and good as long as they understand the limitations of that starter equipment. If you don't expect more of it than what it's designed to do, you probably won't have a problem, and you'll probably be very satisfied. But I see people get frustrated because they think that, or they think that it's going to do the same thing as a bigger equipment, and it isn't. It absolutely, it's a difference between a car and a truck or a minivan. If you get your little Mini Cooper as a beginner set, great. It's going to be great to bop around town with and have some fun with.
Don't go off-roading.
Don't go off-roading with it. Exactly.
Yeah, my comparison was going to be, I was a music major in college, and you find that the kids who start off on the more professional instruments have a lot easier time learning and progressing and doing better on a professional instrument as opposed to a beginner instrument, because those beginner instruments have flaws.
Yes.
And these kids that start out on these beginner instruments may think that it's them, and they get frustrated, and they get it's hard for them.
Exactly.
So if you start out on a better airbrush.
Well, very much. And unfortunately with airbrush, the cheaper the price, the more sacrifices and trade-offs are made in quality. And it's just a matter of machining, equipment, materials, and it is just the fact of it. You have to expect that something is going to be sacrificed, that something is going to be given up. That's why you can look at it, I found an eBay system for $150. Why should I spend $400 on your system? It's understand there's differences. Yes, you can pay for a name. Yes, you can pay for a label, but it's naive to think that you're not going to be sacrificing something.
Oh, and I totally get that, because now I have a nice one. Taking this class from Lisa, she uses a Grex most, and so that's what I ended up buying. And I couldn't have been happier with the upgrade. I feel like I can actually do stuff with the airbrush.
Well, and the beginning equipment, the other equipment, I always advise, unless the equipment's flat out broken, or if it's small equipment and you can't get replacement parts. That's one of the sacrifices, is being able to get replacement parts that will be required. But if there's nothing wrong with the equipment, it's just not doing what you want it to do, don't replace it. Expand your capability set. If you've got a small starter set up and you're doing little dusty things with it, keep it for that. Get a side feed where you can do larger coverage and expand your capabilities. Don't replace things unless you have to.
All right. Someone said, what do you do if you have continual air coming out of your airbrush?
If it's one of those small units, that we've been talking about that I call a disabled double action, you're always going to have air out of the front of the airbrush. If it's a regular traditional airbrush and you've got a larger power source and it didn't always do that, then you've got probably something going on with where the airflow comes in and out, where the trigger is. You could, usually if you get that air channel really gunked up, that it'll be always on. If you go back to the autopsy picture, what I'm talking about is the air valve assembly. And the top of these airbrushes, you've got your trigger button that's pushing a piston down and making the air come on. These little airbrushes, where the trigger button goes through, there's a slot, and it's open. And we all have the experience where we dump color and product back in there accidentally. Or I've seen people that clean an airbrush by submerging it in water, which I absolutely positively do not recommend, because you're getting stuff down in that air valve assembly. Mm-hmm. And you don't want liquid in there at all. If you're completely disassembled and remove the air valve assembly, you're going to have to tear that airbrush apart and clean that part of it out. Make sure that the pistons interaction is smooth. That's probably what's going on.
Okay. Someone asked, do airbrush colors go bad?
I have not experienced them going bad. I use Chef Rubber colors. They've been a great enabler of mine as far as creativity and playing. And they don't have a high sugar content. And their lusters have a lot of alcohol in them, which I really like. And they layer and they work for me. I also have some other brands on the shelf that have more sugar in them. And I've had them for several years and they've still not gone bad. Cocoa butter, because it is an oil-based, eventually, like any oil, can go rancid. It just depends on how you store it and what kind of environment you have, how humid it is. Colors will separate. The liquid colors, you have to really shake a luster. It'll settle in that bottle, and if it'll settle in a bottle, it'll settle inside your airbrush. So you have to know how to agitate those colors, get them really, really mixed up. I do have, on the body painting side, I do have some alcohol-based colors where the different ingredients will finally start to break down and you get chunky, grainy bits of pigment. When you get to that level, and that's after years and years and years, then yeah, don't try putting it through an airbrush. It's ready for the trash.
Okay, great. And then our last question that we are going to ask is, well, it's basically a topic it's really being discussed on our little chat board here, is how to keep stuff, the airbrush colors, from just going everywhere. I mean, it is a problem. It is a problem,
and it is about your environment setup. What you've got is a cloud of overspray. So the longer you airbrush, the more those colors are going into the air. The first thing to do is to, if you're airbrushing occasionally and you don't have a dedicated spray booth, you're still going to want to do something DIY with a box fan or a fan directed out a window. You really need to be aware of where the airflow is in the room that you're airbrushing, because otherwise that color you'll find green on your on the top of your refrigerator 3 years later because you're putting it in the air. If you're airbrushing with a big cloud, you've got too much air pressure, and you're basically putting more product into the air than you are on your object that you're airbrushing. So turn down your pressure and tame it down a little bit.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that we tend to overspray everything, go
yes.
overboard. I think we hold the airbrush too far out and just let it spray everywhere. And I think that's the biggest problem that we have. Mm-hmm. But there still is going to be some of that overspray happening, but you can cut it down quite a bit.
You can cut it down by your technique. If I'm airbrushing a solid object, you don't treat the airbrush as a spray can and just go to town and zigzag all over the place, mm-hmm. because you're using more product than you need. If you take my class, you'll see that I'll teach line by line by line by layering colors up in passes rather than one big long continuous spray. And that's one of the reasons is every time you spray past that object, you're just dumping that color straight into the air and it's not going anywhere except the rest of your kitchen.
Exactly. Okay, I lied. I said we were going to ask that as the last question, but this is something that I feel like needs to be talked about. I know that we're talking a lot about what airbrush to buy, and we're talking about beginner or advanced. Is there anything specific that people need to be looking for? Because I know people go and look other places than in the cake industry for an airbrush. You know, they'll go to Michael's, or they'll go look on eBay or whatever. Is there something specific, like PSI or the size of the needle or?
Absolutely. For the first thing is, and a really good indicator of whether or not you've sacrificed too much for the quality of the equipment that you're buying is you have to be able to get replacement parts. You have to be able to get a new fluid nozzle. It's like tires on a car. Your needle and nozzles are going to need to be replaced. If the supplier, if the eBay store doesn't sell replacement parts, you are going to end up at some point in time with a doorstop. So that's the benchmark, is make sure that you can get the replacement parts that you need. Okay. Next thing is, for this industry, I recommend a 0.3 and above. There's lots of microns. Ooh, I want to do detail work, and they're more expensive. The smaller the needle nozzle size, the more finicky it's going to be because the smaller those parts are. Okay. Because we like airbrushing with pearls on our cakes, and because we're airbrushing at lower pressures, the 0.3 is the minimum size that I recommend, and that's 0.3 millimeters. That's the smallest size that I recommend for culinary artists.
So that's the needle size, 0.3 millimeter needle size, or higher. Okay.
Or higher. The bigger the needle, PSI? PSI for regular color and for a little accenting, like when I'm airbrushing on my wafer paper, I might be down to 5 PSI. If I'm airbrushing a 3-tier cake gold, I'm going to be closer to 15 or 20 PSI. Okay. And I want a good steady pressure. If I'm doing lots of big work, I'm going to go even higher than that. And cocoa butter, certainly, I want to be able to go 35 PSI. Okay.
So between 5 and 20 PSI for basic work, anything more involved, bigger, any cocoa, you want higher than that.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And it's got to be a good, steady pressure. It has to be a good, steady stream, because if it's just there going pop, 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 like that, I've seen these really small $59 wonders that will, all they can airbrush is it's literally a dotted line. Because they're so small that they can't hold a steady stream of air.
Okay. All right, so there you go. There's some good information for you guys to go by, some guidelines. I think that's really important, and I think everybody appreciates that kind of information. So, okay, we are going to move on to the discount and the giveaway. So, yeah, let's see. Real quick before we do that, this is Lisa's going to be teaching a class in Chicago in November that you guys can go and take a look at. Do you have information for that on your Facebook page? I just posted it this morning. If somebody asks a question, there's 50 other people that are having the same question. So there's no super secret knowledge with me. If I know it, I'll share it. If I have an opinion, I'll express it. Sometimes more diplomatically than others. But yeah, if you're on one of the social sites like Cake Central or on Facebook, or straight to me in my email, I'm here to help, because again, it's my way of paying it forward. And back to that shoulda, coulda, woulda, information is valuable, and sharing safety information, especially in the culinary world and the makeup world, because we're making decisions that affect other people. They're going to be eating what we're decorating, etc. So good practices and good understanding is just it's really important. So again, thank you for the opportunity for sharing that with everybody. Wonderful. All right. Again, thank you so much, you guys. You guys are wonderful. Thank you, Lisa, for coming on.
Thank you for breaking into your holiday for this.
Well, you know, we're just hanging out, trying to get the most of our summer before it's over. So, yeah. Again, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're such an amazing wealth of knowledge, and we appreciate you coming in and sharing with us. So, all right. I guess we will see you guys all next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.